everyone, welcome. Thank you so much for coming. If you don't already know, my name is Dr. Amanda Zavitz, and I am a professor of sociology here at Fanshawe College. I work in the School of Language and Liberal Studies, and I'm also the organizer of the Social Science Speakers Series. Thank you all so much for coming. Today you're in for a special treat. We've got with us one of Canada's best lecturers. Today we're welcoming Dr. Anton Allahar, and Dr. Allahar is also a professor of sociology at the University of Western Ontario. Dr. Allahar specializes in social inequality and sociological theory. His areas of expertise are in terms of globalization and understanding the interconnections between the political, economic, and social implications of globalization and neoliberalism. If you've ever taken a class with me, Zavitz 101 is based on Allahar 101. So Dr. Allahar has written countless books and articles. I actually went last night to look them up and I stopped counting because it made me tired. There are two of Dr. Allahar's books that are my personal favorite. One is called Sociology in the Periphery and the other is called For Richer or Poorer. And a lot of what I do as a teacher are based on these works. Beyond being a brilliant academic and scholar, Dr. Allahar is also recognized by his students as one of the best professors. He's routinely named charismatic and magnificent and the best professor on campus. He's also been awarded all sorts of awards for being a good professor and teacher. Most recently, he was nominated for TVO's Best Lecturer in Ontario. I could spend the rest of our time here talking about how fabulous Dr. Allahar is, but you're here to hear him and not me speak. So I will finish with saying that I'm very, very pleased to have him here. Dr. Allahar has been an inspiration for me. He is my mentor, and most of all, he is my dear, dear friend. So thank you so much for coming, and please give him a warm welcome.
Okay, good afternoon. I am told I have 2 hours. Can you hear me up there in the cheap seats, okay? So, I don't need the microphone. Okay, there are a couple things. I only have a short time to speak with you, and I will therefore have to speak in broad strokes of the brush. I want to thank Amanda, one of my favorite people in the world, for having invited me. She, when I met Amanda as an undergrad student back in the Middle Ages, I had all of my hair. What I have left is because she left. So, Liz was also a student of mine back in the old days. I saw Curtis here, so I feel really, really old. It's not often I get to be the oldest person in the room, but this is one of those opportunities. So I'm going to be talking in broad strokes of the brush. I want to tell you right off the bat that I am not an angry person. Many people think I'm angry because of the way I speak. I am passionate about what I have to say and the way in which I say it. So just if I start getting off and start foaming at the ears and so on, just understand it's passion and it's not anger, although anger is a passion. I want you to understand that you shouldn't write me off. There are two things I want us to think about. One is I am not going to be engaged in student bashing, even if it may come across like that. We have equal time that I can bash some of your teachers in the audience and administrators if they're anywhere around, so that it's an equal opportunity sort of thing. I will take a really hard and critical look at higher education, and I have provisionally titled what I'm going to say Higher Education or Education for Hire. I had given this title to a talk I was invited to do at the University of the West Indies in Barbados. And when about 2 days before my lecture, two friends came to me and says, "You can't do that." I said, "Why?" "You don't go into a man's house and insult him." The man in question is the president of the University of the West Indies, Cave Hill campus, Barbados. The people in Barbados are all quick to say that they're paying these high salaries to those professors up on the hill and so on, they don't do anything but bullshit. And if you go and you tell everybody in Barbados that it's a BS session that's going on, they're going to take away the funding from the university, people's jobs will be jeopardized, and so. So I could not do the lecture, Higher Education or Education for Hire. What I want to say though is some of the features, some of the phenomena that I'll talk about are quite common in the Caribbean, in South America. I teach in Russia. I was in China doing some lectures 2 years ago, here in Canada and other places. These are common features that I've seen, so it is not a uniquely Canadian phenomenon. I want to ask a rhetorical question of the teachers in the room. What would happen if we were to fail all of our students who deserve to be failed? Not all of our students, those who deserve to be failed. Those who expend minimal effort. What would happen if we failed all of them? That's the rhetorical question I want you to bear in mind. And there's a contradiction that is going to be implicit in what I have to say. I don't know if my time will run out before I get there, but I'll give you the conclusion just in case I run out of time. And this has to do with the question of fooling ourselves, lying to ourselves. We live in a capitalist society, which by definition is a society of inequality. You cannot have capitalism with a heart, I used to say to Amanda long ago. By definition, there will be some who own and some who do not own the means of production in the society. Capitalism with a heart is nonsense. It doesn't exist. This being said, can we, in all of the wider inequalities that we celebrate in our society, we celebrate them, can we hope to equalize those inequalities by having equal access to education? Would all of those systemic entrenched inequalities be taken away merely by giving everybody an equal shot at education? I think not. I think that even though we may all be in the same class on day one, year one at Fanshawe or some other place, we are not equal. We have all had differential exposures to privilege in the society, and some of us have had to work while we went to school. Some came from homes that were more riven with problems. Some of us have tutors, some don't, and so on. So the fact that we're all here on day one, year one, does not mean we're all equal. That's part of the fiction that we entertain in our society that tells us, don't be upset, one day you too can be where I am. So that's the setup for it. What I want to highlight in the discussion today is a challenge or an obstacle that those of us who are educators, those of us who are students, those who are administrators, a challenge that we all face. And the challenge in one of the books, the Ivory Tower Blues, that we did, the challenge is one of something we call education inflation. You should know that when that book was completed, Jim Cote and I, my co-author and I asked the then president of the University of Western Ontario to take a look at it and to please write the foreword to the book. Davenport was his name. Davenport kept the manuscript for about a month. Then he returned it to me and said, Anton, this is wonderful stuff, this is brilliant stuff, but I cannot write the foreword. Wait until I'm no longer president and then I will. What he was suggesting is that as an administrator, these truths that he held to be self-evident okay, could not be witnessed. He could not put his signature to them. Immediately in that response, I got a sense that it is that BS session I was talking to you about. When the Ivory Tower Blues came out, it was quite successful. It stayed on the Amazon bestseller list for quite a while, and due to that kind of reception, we did the other book, Lowering Higher Education, that was equally successful. Ivory Tower spoke about education inflation, and the Lowering Higher Education spoke about the corporatization of the university. So what I will do today is to try to mix both of these. If it appears to be choppy or jerky, you will bear with me and understand that I am trying to do my best in the short time that I have allocated. Before unpacking the concept of education inflation, I want to acknowledge that my comments are best directed to those who work in the humanities, arts, and social sciences in these kinds of settings, universities, colleges, even high schools. I've been doing a lot of things lately, so as Amanda will tell you, I am not one who reads lectures. I just lecture. But I'm doing a number of different things at the same time, so in order for coherence, I will glance at my notes from time to time. I don't mean any disrespect. So to go to our students then, I think it is important to recognize, some of us may have recognized it already, but we have not been able to name it, to recognize the fact that our students today, by comparison with our students yesterday, are a lot more immature. They are much younger in chronological age and much younger socially. Their behavior is very different from, say, the behavior we were accustomed to 15 years ago, 20 years ago, even when I was a student. Again, this is not to dump on them. Every generation of old people blames the youth, no? George Bernard Shaw told us that youth was wasted on the young. And every new generation invents that. I remember my generation used to make fun of other old people at the time, and then the long hairs and the pot smoking and the free love and free sex people came, and everybody thought that was normal. Now we've got a different set of old people complaining about Justin Bieber and the little Miley Cyrus and her twerking. Unlike previous generations, which came from what I call a literary tradition, a tradition where for information we used to read, the modern generation is more audiovisual. Instead of reading for information, they click on for information. And in a very real sense, I believe that the internet has made us all a lot more stupid than we were before. You get those instant things, you don't have to read a book, you just take 2 keywords, put it in there, and boom, it jumps up. And you don't understand what came before, what came after, but you can excise a paragraph from something that you saw on the net and put it in your essay. Those of us who are teachers know that this has occasioned a very different kind of problem for us, a more high-tech version of plagiarism. And it is really very difficult to track down these millions of things on the net and, you know, the essays that you can purchase, the ones you can invent, a paragraph from here, the cut and paste, and so on. So it's a new kind of challenge. But the students, increasingly, are good students, as I'm going to say, but they have challenges that they face tied to our wider societal culture and economy. Unlike previous generations that valued reading, therefore, the current ones are very impatient. They want instant answers, instant questions, instant disposable this, instant dinner, instant TV, and the like. This generation, therefore, I have found, is not given to philosophical meanderings. They don't want to reflect. They want the question now and the answer now. And because of that, they lack a philosophical imagination. And one of the things that I have come to discover is when you lack an imagination, you cannot even begin to imagine what you lack. When you lack imagination, you can't begin to think of what you don't have. But we are told that it is your old generation that is hung up on these kinds of things that make you so bitchy and kvetching and so on all the time. Really, you need to come alive and join the 21st century and understand that we do things differently. So this is the sort of standoff that we are talking about. I don't think that individual students are to be blamed, individual parents, individual teachers. It is systemic. It is cultural. And one of the things that I talk about, we kind of encourage this behavior among our students. The official motto of the University of Western Ontario is, quote, major in yourself, unquote. Now, what message are we sending to the young people when we tell them to major in themselves? It's a narrow, narcissistic self-adulation that we are talking about. And when I go to the library to get an article to read so that I may write an essay, and the pages are neatly cut out with a razor blade, they're cut out by someone who is majoring in themselves. That's the individualism and the narcissism that is systemic and cultural, not individual. This is what we tend to forget. Many commentators, because of this, have noted that post-secondary education has become just another commodity. The notion that students will tell us, oh, this is my degree, I paid for it, so please give it to me. It is a commodity, something to be bought, sold, traded on the market. Students are therefore really just purchasing admission tickets to jobs. And in the Lowering Higher Education book, we talked about the distinction between training and education. Many people tend to think of the university as a vocational or pseudo-vocational institution, which is an institution you go to get training for a job. Universities are not about that. That's why God invented community colleges, to give people practical skills so they can go out onto the market and they can parlay their skills into jobs, into different things. If I do have time later, I'll make a distinction between education and training. I will move on now. Because of this kind of culture that we have weaved around ourselves, the current college and university students witness a transformation of their environment. The current college campus and the university campus increasingly has come to resemble a shopping mall. The wider materialist, consumerist culture that we have pervades the university, and it is all driven by the language of capital. So I meet students as the semesters begin and say, "Hi, Prof. I'm shopping," the language of capital, "for a good course. I'm shopping for a good prof." That language is not just what emanates from the mouth, it permeates their thinking. It is part of their mindset about shopping, shop till you drop sort of idea. Campuses, as a result, today sport banks and banking machines, beauty salons, tanning rooms, we had them at Western until recently, travel agencies, pharmacies, state-of-the-art gym and recreational facilities, doctors and chiropractors' offices, computer stores, designer clothing stores, record stores, and all manner of corporate and fast food outlets that can even endow professorial chairs. That's a university campus. Hence, we have this consumerist kind of idea. 2 years ago, I was invited at Ryerson to do a distinguished professor's lecture, and I was hosted at the so-called Rogers School of Journalism. Now, can you imagine me going into the Rogers School of Journalism and doing a Noam Chomsky number on them? You don't bite the hand that feeds you. How can you get GM and these kinds of places funding programs at the university when GM is making weapons of mass destruction? To what extent is the corporate agenda running what we have in the classrooms? To what extent can we retain our academic integrity and independence and say to the government, you need to subsidize us. We don't need Rogers, we don't need GM, we don't need these people because their interests are not the interests that we have. They're interested in training, not in educating. Okay? So much for that rant. Universities have become business places. And business places, as you know, cater to the bottom line. Our students are not students. We don't care about your names. You are BIUs, basic income units. We are concerned about filling the seats as if it were a football stadium. These are the concerns that populate the minds of the administrators, where at the end of the day, for each additional undergrad, each additional master's, each additional PhD student, we get so much funding from the government. So therefore, it is in our interest to have this kind of orientation, the language of capital. As a result, our students have ceased to be our students, and they've now become our customers. At the University of the West Indies in Jamaica, where I also taught, the sign over the building that used to say student services now says customer services. And the language betrays what is going on in higher education. As I said, we're all products and producers of this mentality. Products and producers of this system. So it is not about blaming the individuals once more. I'm harping on this because I don't want you to go away with the wrong impression. I want to make 3 really broad distinctions or divisions among the students that I've had in the 37 years I've been a professor. The first category are those that I describe as bright and highly motivated students. They're the ones who will do very well even without good teachers. Some of them may be sitting in this room right now. They're highly motivated, the 10% who really don't need us, they just need a place to sit down and someone to legitimize their degree. 10% of my students, and perhaps yours too, are like this, and I'm not talking about those. The second group of students are the ones that I see as mediocre. They see high school, college, and university as stages in the life cycle. They feel that education is a right with no responsibilities. I have a right to be here, but I don't have any responsibilities to live up to. They will scrape by with minimum effort, those mediocre students. And then there's a third group of students, those who don't really want to be here, but who are here because of other pressures. The third group of students are here because of parental insistence, because their friends have gone on to this place and their colleagues and so on, and they have been given this idea that everybody should have a college diploma or a university degree. Now, this has caused all kinds of grief for me, because I have met a lot of people at university who don't deserve to be at university, who don't want to be at university. And in an interview, a radio interview I did some years when one of these books came on, there's a third book in the trilogy. It's called La Queue du Papier, which is the paper chase in English, that talked about credentialism and so on. And in a radio interview, there was a call in from a university president, who shall remain nameless. He is the president of, who accused me of being an elitist. And I asked him on the radio show, in what does my elitism consist? He says, because, let me see if I got you right, you said that not everybody should go to university. I said, well, thank goodness you did get me right. Not everybody should go. He says, that's your elitism, and you think you're better because you have a PhD and an MA, RSVP, DDT, VD, whatever degrees you have behind your name, you have those things, and you think that others ought not to have access to those credentials too. I said, no, not at all. I have met a lot of Canadians, decent, law-abiding, hard-working, tax-paying, who have never been to university, and that's a good thing. But I turned it on him and said, you are the one who is an elitist because you think that unless you go to university, you're a nobody. Well, the whole switchboard lit up. All kinds of truck drivers are calling in and applauding me and so on. So that nameless former president as well is one of those who thinks that way. It is not about being elitist and keeping people out. Universities and colleges are special places. We pursue a kind of knowledge, a kind of education that John and Jane, wonderful Canadians, are not prepared for. And what is happening is that our classrooms are becoming increasingly populated by people who are not habituated to thinking. That being the case, I will go on. The people in the second and third groups, they got by with a minimum of effort. Many of these people tell us high school was a breeze. I had to expend no effort. The grades were there, and so on and so forth. There was no challenge. It was a waste of time. Some of you sitting in this room may really, I see some heads nodding in the affirmative, may well know what I'm talking about. Many of these people are products of a revolution in political correctness that we have witnessed in our society. A revolution that has empowered people who don't deserve power. That has entitled people who don't deserve titles. There's a book that two colleagues at the University of Georgia wrote called A Narcissism Epidemic. And the subtitle is, It's Not All About You. Okay? This attitude of being entitled and empowered and so on, tied to the atmosphere of entitlement, students who are empowered, who know their rights but who don't want to live up to their responsibilities, is part of what we call in these books the cult of self-esteem. The cult of self-esteem. The feel-good idea that learning must be seen as fun and enjoyable, or else it's not worthwhile. And I always have a difficult time with this. That the things I teach about, poverty, imperialism, colonialism, homophobia, sexism, racism, if you think that's fun, you've got to be sick. You're not going to leave my class and tell me I'm not doing it because it's not fun. Where did you get this idea, this feel-good sense? But that's part of the cult of self-esteem that we have created for the young people, for the students. And I have colleagues who do it, the students demand it, and the parents of the students insist on it. We have come to treat our students as fragile entities that need to be coddled and protected from criticism. Heaven forbid you criticize them. You might just stymie their growth. You might lead them to do some kind of strange things and they end up on Oprah or Dr. Phil or one of these people telling about this professor who impacted me by criticizing me. We don't criticize. We live in an age when everything is okay. Everything is cool. And that's your point of view, this is my point of view, now let's go have a coffee. And nobody challenges ideas anymore. As a consequence, we have settled for a kind of mediocrity that is reflected in the lack of productivity of the wider economy in the country. There's a kind of a therapeutic philosophy that goes through the classrooms and the faculty meetings and so on that we have, where you got to be careful, don't piss them off, don't be too rough, don't do this and so on, because you never can tell what will happen. That therapeutic philosophy asks us to treat our students as if they were in some kind of an advanced kindergarten class. Everybody must get a start. Okay? You have your children in this school, a kindergarten or a grade school and so on, and if Tommy and Jane and Betty and Frank get stars, well, what about Melissa? Melissa didn't do anything to deserve. Well, come on, you're going to marginalize her. She's going to develop issues and end up with Dr. Phil. No? So give everybody that star, and this is the whole notion. Unlike the old days when one rewarded achievement, today one rewards effort, even if it is a mediocre sort of effort. This is aided and abetted by what Jim and I call in these books the helicopter parent, the ones who hover over. Little Tommy, oh, you're going out in the backyard to play? Put on your helmet, darling. You may just trip and bump your nose. Okay? Let mommy kiss it better. And this is the kind of thing, no more of those bumps and bruises and so on. Or somebody tells you something in the schoolyard and you get really upset, you go and tell mommy, and mommy comes and kicks the shit out of the little child. This kind of hovering, has given us a situation where, remember this guy, Ethan Couch? The name may not mean a lot to you, but this is a young fellow who was drunk and driving and killed 4 people recently. And the judge let him off because he was driving under the affluence. The argument, the defense was that he was so rich that he never knew responsibility. Can you imagine a judge making this determination? He didn't know responsibility. So don't blame him for killing those 4 people, blame his parents who are rich. And the judge sentenced him to a rehab that cost $450,000. Not prison, not this, not that, and the other. That is the helicopter parent. I have had parents who come and they ask me to account for things I say. One guy who didn't know who he was mixing it up with called me up and told me that I must not have his daughter read Noam Chomsky in my classes because Chomsky is anti-Semitic. And I told him, listen, you stay out of my classroom, I'll stay out of your courtroom. Some high-flying Toronto lawyer. Well, he took his daughter out of my classroom and I said, more power to all of us. But where does the parent get off telling the professor what ought to be read, what should not be read in the classroom? That's meddling. One of the funniest cases was told to me by my dean a couple of years ago on the first day of classes when a mother called up the dean's office saying, my son is only 18 and this is his first year at university. He has never been away from home and so, Dean, do you mind if I just put a little cot in his residence room for 2 or 3 nights, not a big deal, just to smooth him through the transition. That is the coddling, that's the therapeutic philosophy. So, and when that student comes before me in a class and makes some outlandish sexist or homophobic or racist statement, and I tell that student where to go, they melt into a bundle of tears and they shiver and they ask their father to call me up. The education inflation about which I've spoken has 2 dimensions. One I refer to as credential inflation, and the other as grade inflation. 2 of them together give us this notion of education inflation. I use the word inflation in inverted commas because it has a special meaning. Inflation, in the way we explain it to the non-specialist in economics, is too much money chasing too few goods. So if we all had $1,000, but we only had 5 of these pencils, too few pencils, too much money, and you need the pencils, you're going to say, I'll give you 20 bucks for the pencil. No, 30 bucks, 35, 40. The price keeps going up. The price becomes inflated because we're not producing. The problem with grades, unlike prices, is that grades have a ceiling of 100. For prices, the ceiling is the sky. So that what we are having is not so much grade inflation as there is grade compression. So that today, it is very difficult for us to distinguish between good, very good, outstanding, and excellent. They're all crammed into this little ceiling somewhere between the lower 80s and the lower 90s. And then you write letters of reference and everybody has to get an A, because you don't want to upset anybody. And with the freedom of information, you don't want to say this is really a C student. The student finds out, they sue you for not getting the job and things like that. So that a certain amount of politics will enter into the theater of the academy in this way. As student demand increases, demand for seats, which are now sold, our university is selling seats to foreign students in graduate school. Okay? You can get, it makes economic sense. If a foreign student pays $20,000 a year for a master's education, and one of you pays $7,000 a year, I mean, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to know I'm going to sell it to the foreign student. And the foreign students are coming in. At Central High School here in town, there's an entire class that has just been designated for students coming from China. A whole classroom of students from China. And so I have nothing against the Chinese people. I must have some Chinese in me too. Okay? But what we are doing is that we are catering to the market in these kinds of concerns. And I'll get on to that if I have time later. The pursuit and the accumulation of educational credentials, of degrees, diplomas, certificates, are almost ends in themselves. Young people go around just getting these bits and pieces of paper as ends in themselves. They're coming out, having expended minimal effort, having amassed major loans or debt, and they expect the wider society to accord them a certain kind of reception that says, here's your job, here's your desk, these are the people whom you will supervise. As we know, increases in the numbers of credentialed people have served to inflate the qualifications needed for jobs. Before Blockbuster closed, they used to advertise jobs as Blockbuster manager, you have to have a BA. What the devil do you need a BA for in order to find where the porno movies are? But when everybody wants to get a job at Blockbuster because they need to put food on the table, then we have to find ways of weeding it out. When I was a student in high school, all of my teachers were high school graduates. That was it. They finished high school, and that qualified them to stand in front of me. They may have gone to the teachers training college for 1 year. Today, in order to be a teacher, you need a Bachelor of Arts or Bachelor of Science. You need a Bachelor of Education, sometimes an MEd, some WIMIS, some life-saving, and all kinds of things like that. For doing the same jobs, we have now increased it. You want to go to med school? And don't be mistaken, med school is an undergraduate degree. Law school is an undergrad degree. But they walk around like they're hottest things in sliced bread, thinking, and our society accords so much privilege and prestige to doctors and lawyers, as if they were all that. Some of the most boring people, I don't mean to offend any of you who want to be or who are doctors and lawyers in the society. But when you have this kind of approach, this kind of attitude to things, what it does is that it devalues others. I used the expression earlier, so-and-so is not rocket science. Okay? And we tend to presume those who work with numbers, with technology and so are brighter than those. You never hear somebody who's really good at Shakespeare being called an English brain, a Shakespeare scientist. But scientific knowledge we privilege over other forms of knowing. And when you say rocket science, well, that's the epitome. You don't get any brighter than that in the society. Today, you can go to law school and you can go to med school, but you need your BA and your BN and all those things. You did not need that. The first day I taught at Western in 1984, I had a young woman, a student who was, her name was Jeanette Wright. I don't know what happened to her, but the only low grade she had in her entire career was from me, 95. Everybody else had this. And she got into med school after her first year. Okay? You don't need all of that time, as Jim Cote and I say in these books, is a kind of a moratorium on youth. We don't have enough jobs for you out there, so we're going to keep you in school longer. And we're going to build the universities and the Fanshawe colleges and the Seneca and the Sheridan and the Ryerson and so on to warehouse you until the economy can find room for you. But in the meantime, we don't want all of these active, intelligent people not doing something. They might just start revolutions and occupy movements out there if we don't occupy or preoccupy them with some of these concerns. Democratization. This is another big one, that we are really very hip on being democratic in this part of the world. It's a little bit of a vacuous claim, but I don't have time to go into that. but democratization. We want to democratize access to higher education, as that president from Guelph called it. I think Summerhill, the one who should remain nameless. Summerhill or something like that is his name. We have administrators, school superintendents, board superintendents, some principals. They don't like to hear it. But a very central part of what we do at the colleges and universities these days is dumbing down the curriculum. We cannot continue to make demands of the students that were probably made of us. I stopped teaching the courses in social theory in my department when I would talk about the dialectic and I would talk about history and the students don't have a clue. I took too long to prepare myself to stand before you, to prostitute myself and cut things out and to dumb things down. In my filing cabinets in my office, I have 2 letters. One from McGraw-Hill, one from Nelson of Canada. Chapters I had written for intro books in sociology where they wrote back and said, "Dear Dr. Allahar, please write this at a grade 10 level. For heaven's sake, it's for first year university," quote unquote. And they don't see the contradiction. The dumbing down is here. And the dumbing down is a very important part of what we're doing. When you no longer were students and you became customers, you know the customer is always right. And to that extent, I am not going to offer you any resistance. I'm not going to give you tough things to do so that I will continue to be the nice guy. Democratization asked for transparency. We want to see what's going on inside that university. You guys get big salaries and you spend a lot of money. We want to know. But the ordinary folks, the decent, hard-working, law-abiding, tax-paying, nice people, they don't really know what goes on in here. So when they get the transparency, what are they saying? Well, I want more scholar for my dollar. I want my child to get a job when they come out. So therefore, I'm going to give more funding to engineering, technology, computers, and so on. No more Shakespeare. No more arts. No more so on and so forth. We want to be very answerable, accountable for the things that we do. So what we have then is a first class and second class sort of university system, and the young people wear the t-shirts that tell you go hard or go home, which is a shot against social science. Hard science versus social science is one of the things that they say. We all know the stories about how many of our high school graduates are coming out not fully literate, who are able perhaps to write their names and to read simple things but cannot follow more complex directions. Functional illiteracy, I'm talking about. And there's also the fear that the high school diploma, which is so inflated today, will catch up with us at the university with the BA, the bachelor's. Some of you may know that the BA, the 3-year BA, is now gone the way of the dodo bird. And it doesn't exist. Some of it might still be grandfathered and phasing out. In its place, what they've done, with the removal of grade 12, or grade 13, sorry, what they've done is to add a 4-year general BA alongside a 4-year honors BA. So they're just getting an extra year of tuition, an extra year of bad food and expensive books and so on out of you, but you still come out with that. And because of the credential inflation of which I spoke, very soon, to get an entry-level white-collar job, you're going to be asked to have a master's degree of some sort, where the BAs and so on, when everybody has a high school diploma, the high school diploma is worth less than when few people had it. And the same goes on and on. I want to consider the business degree as an example, to look at what I call the MBA Paradox. In the 1970s and in the 1980s, the MBAs monopolized the high-paying jobs in business and finance. They dominated the opulent and sexy jobs that we had, and everybody looked at that so-called dot-com generation as the way they wanted their children, if not themselves, to go. This led economically minded universities and community colleges everywhere, and almost overnight, to offer a variety of certificates, diplomas, degrees, and so on in the area of business. Predictably, and you don't have to be an economist to know it, as the numbers of graduates became higher, as they increased, their values declined. So we have today what I call dime a dozen MBAs running around, and other business graduates, not just the MBAs, and they're faced with serious unemployment and underemployment, these people who are running around. The ones that come out of Ivy are even more likely to be unemployed because they're so full of themselves they think they deserve more than the others coming from Laurier and such places. But the employer knows that those people can do the job just as well, and they will accept $20, $30, $40, $50,000 less. So those Ivy ones with their noses up in the air are the ones who are woefully underemployed today. To restore the MBA to its position of privilege in the credentials hierarchy, many business schools have moved in a contradictory way to a traditional form of social closure. So no more democracy, no more equal access. The new form of social closure is the privatization of the university and the deregulation of tuition. So if you want to get a proper degree, you will go to one of those schools like Queen's or Western, as opposed to, you can name the others, I'm not going to call it. What has happened is that we now have first class and second class MBAs and HBAs and commerce degrees all the way down the line, with a whole host of certificates and diplomas. It's the credential, we're chasing paper, the paper chase, I said. Ironically, therefore, the whole push toward democratization of business education that sparked credential inflation in business in the first place has had the unintended consequence of reinforcing unequal access to education. An MBA at Western now is over $70,000. Imagine. Who can afford that? Who can cough up that kind of money? Well, the same guy who's driving under the affluence, perhaps, but not the average Joe or Jane in our society. This leads me then to go quickly to the other question of the grade inflation that I hinted at. Because students from the elite classes in our society, I said our society is very, very unequal, so that education cannot equalize that inequality as we are giving people to believe. Because those students from the elite classes can afford a better quality of education, better quality of tuition, they can buy the books and they can get the iPad, iPod, There's no mistake. Part of the narcissistic, individualistic idea. iPod, iPhone, iPad, me, moi, sort of thing. It's not by accident that you have the I in there. The ideal of democratization clashes with the class stratified nature of our society. This is something that the administrators and the politicians don't like to admit. It has fostered the growth in political correctness, where those people, not just who are class underprivileged, but who are ethnically, racially, gender-wise, and so on, are routinely calling to task those people who have been traditionally privileged in the society. So we are getting a kind of a disdain for those people who are more comfortable. And those of you who know the population at Western, you know that there's a fair amount of affluence among the students. Indeed, London is one of the more affluent cities in the country, measured by more millionaires per capita, more swimming pools per capita, and so on. These are the criteria that people employ. As a consequence, the majority of the young people, the students, who are not silly, they're no fools, they know what they want and they know how to get it. And they become increasingly assertive of their rights, I talked about before. And they've become increasingly politically manipulative of the system in which they are embedded. One commentator charges that, quote, thanks to student evaluations, students have learned the not so subtle art of blackmail, which they use against professionally inexperienced teachers, TAs, and junior untenured faculty members, unquote. So you're out there and you know this teacher just got a job, wants to keep a job, wants to get tenure, and you turn the pressure up. And the pressure is to get better grades. Another person commented in the Chronicle of Higher Education about those cases in which, quote, students who do not receive the grade they need to pass often hold the professor and then the administration responsible. And you can get all of the issues, the cases that come before the different boards. The major source of grade inflation has also witnessed a virtual removal of the fear of failure. I can't tell you when last somebody in my department failed a master's degree defense, a PhD degree defense, honors thesis. I can't. We are going to do all kinds of bend over backward, do all kinds of contortions and twerking to make sure that you are going to, once you walk in those front gates, you're going to walk out with that bit of paper. So in this environment, the fear of failure has all but been taken away. And those people who do fail, they try their very best to fail. They make a special effort to fail. Not coming to classes, not doing this, not doing that, and the other. Failure is not something that is taken very easily because you're not students, you're customers. Okay? And customers are always right. So whereas I think democratization of higher education is a positive thing, and I really think it is a good thing, it has also produced credential and grade inflation, thereby aggravating the general crisis facing the system, facing the students, facing the teachers, facing the administrators more widely. High grades are tickets to jobs in the credentials hierarchy, admission to graduate schools, to professional schools, and so on and so forth. And the students therefore become very grades driven. They want to get those grades, but they don't do what is required by and large. And this is the second and third groups of students I'm referring to. What is required? The hard work, the long hours, and so on and so forth. Those are not the things that I find my students doing. As I said, I can also talk to you about my colleagues and their other concerns and so, but that I don't have time for today. The students experience a great deal of pressure from their parents, from their teachers, from their peers, wider family, from the job market and so on. These pressures make them very neurotic. They cry. Students cry often, they cry a lot, they break down, and they have never been, because of helicopter mom and dad, they've never been given challenges. They've never been left to have the bruised knee, to bleed, and to feel some pain. As a consequence, when faced with failure, they have this total meltdown, and you as a professor feel like shit. You don't know how to respond to it. What have I done? Will I be charged with something? And so on and so forth in the case. So compared to the students of earlier generations, before this feel-good narcissistic environment came to be, today's students I find are more individualistic, more self-seeking in their pursuits. I know students at the beginning of the year, I will say, I want you to write an essay on this, and so. Well, they want the books, but they don't want to take the books out now because the essay is not due until 2-3 months down. They take the sociology books and hide them somewhere in the engineering section. And those books, once misfiled, are effectively lost for 5 or 7 years. So when they're ready to do their essays, they can go to engineering, get the sociology books, do it because they're majoring in themselves. That's how you major in yourself. That's the I and the iPod and the I, me, moi thing I was talking about. Today, what has happened at the university is that we are more catering to educational criteria. We are more interested in satisfying criteria rather than meeting standards. Criteria are grades. What are the criteria for getting into the program? 88, 98, 58, and so on. Those are criteria. Standards are different. Standards talk about critical thinking, the ability to unpack arguments, to understand the abstractions of concepts that we use. And as I said, if you lack imagination, you can't begin to imagine what you lack. And that being the case, we are only looking today at criteria, and standards have gone by the wayside in what we're doing. As a consequence, our students, and there still are those 10%, okay? There still are the ones who are going to go out there and shine and kick butt and what have you. But in the meantime, we have a whole tribe of others we must pull along. So the professor who stands in front of the class, she needs to slow down because she does not want to alienate the majority of those in class who have expended less of an effort. That's why the top 10% really do not need the outstanding professor, but the others do. And if they are entitled, if they are empowered, then you have issues. I will try to go a little bit more quickly to get to this. We, in the wider society, we understand that what we have been doing is not correct. But we continue to entertain the fiction. We know about grade inflation, we know about dumbing down, we know about credential inflation, we know about helicopter parenting, and so on. The schools, say the universities in the US and Canada, do not trust the high schools. So that if you want to go to university in the States, after you finish high school, you have to do your SATs. student aptitude tests. Regardless of how well you did in high school, you need to do your SATs because they don't trust what's going on with those inflated grades and scared teachers. But we too here have this kind of issue that we're facing. We don't have SATs, but if you want to go to grad school, many schools you have to pass the GRE to get in, the Graduate Record Entrance Exam. And I know of no professional school in Canada, medicine, pharmacy, law, business, that does not require you to do an LSAT, a PCAT, a GMAT, a DAT, dental aptitude, and so on and so forth. Even though you may have all of the BAs, MAs, and PhDs in the world, you want to go to law school, you got to pass the LSAT. Why? Because we don't trust your PhDs either. A lot of people through the credential inflation, they have the paper, but they know sweet bugger all. And our economic system, being as brilliant as it is, capitalism is marvelous, resilient. They spot the need out there. Okay, so we need all of these other things, and a whole parallel education industry has grown up alongside the university called Sylvan Learning, Kaplan, what's the other one, Oxford Seminar Series, and so on and so forth, who all teach to the test. So the students are not coming away any more informed, but because they teach the test, they get into the schools and then they get the credentials and they go out there and they practice their craft. There's a Disengagement Compact, something that Jim and I made a big deal of in these books. The Disengagement Compact speaks to the younger, the junior, the insecure teacher, the one who, faced with a student who's pretty tough, says, listen, I want you to cut me some slack, and I will give you a B. Don't bother me too much, I won't bother you too much. Okay? And as opposed to the old days when the C was kind of referred to as the gentleman's C, today a C is a slap in the face. So that you have to get that B, and you will get okay. We want to reward achievement. There was a young woman in one of my classes last year, a seminar class where I have 10 marks out of the whole year for participation. She did not participate. She came, sat in class very dutifully and so on. I was generous, I gave her 6 out of 10 for the year. She was indignant, wanted to know why. I was at every class. I said, but I'm not supposed to reward you for things that you're supposed to do. Next year you will graduate. You're a 4th year honors student. You will graduate and you will get a job. If you showed up for your job every day and did nothing, you think they will pay you. Showing up is not what it is about. Well, she started to cry and went to the dean and the chair and told them that I was abusing her. The dean and the chair know they don't mess with me. The young woman in question went off, but she thought that she was an A student when she did not do A work. And my concern is not with the young woman. My concern is with the rest of us who told her that for minimal effort, she will get maximal reward. Where did that come from? You know, our popular culture, our teachers, our preachers, our politicians, and so on, parents, all of those things. That's why I say it is more systemic than it is individual. I want to just read the conclusion at you. Any solution to the crisis will have to begin with a reassessment of our entire education industry. Democratization and the inclusive curriculum are important gains and they must be safeguarded. However, our education must not become political footballs or apolitical football for powerful interest groups like politicians, board superintendents, administrators, professors, and students who have narrow, selfish aims. Academic standards must not fall prey to political correctness, for politics have no place in the classroom, definitely not in my classrooms, although I'm a political sociologist. Politics have no place in the classroom, nor do professors who pass the buck and students who spend that buck. The classroom must not become a place where politicians reside and where genuine scholarship is discouraged. Educational credentials must be earned and not politically guaranteed. If I have pissed you all off, then I've been successful. Thank you.
So many of you have to leave. Again, I just want to say thanks so much for coming and thanks for the wonderful information presented by Dr. Allahar. Thank you.